This British jet fighter just missed World War II and entered service after the end of the war. It was a unique design, very different from the other early jet fighters, with its single engine, twin boom tail, and partly wooden construction. And one of its variants became the first British aircraft to break the sound barrier. This was the Havilland Vampire fighter jet. So let's see the history of this aircraft today. Before and during the Second World War, the aviation technology went through a great evolution, as in the span of a decade, the old biplanes were replaced with faster and more advanced monoplanes, which then swapped their piston engines and propellers for the newest jet engines in the search for more speed. The British jet engine and jet-powered aircraft development in the late 1930s and early 1940s lagged somewhat behind the Germans, as they only made their first jet-powered flight in May 1941 with the E-2839 type. While in Germany, the Heinkel HE-178 already flew in 1939, powered by a turbojet engine. Though the work on the famous Gloucester Meteor started back in 1940, even before the first usable British jet engines were finalized, there were also other designs in development which planned to utilize this new propulsion type. In early 1941, Sir Henry Tizard suggested to de Havilland to start developing a fighter aircraft built around this new technology, and though this was unprecedented before, also work on the engine for the new design. While most contemporary designs use two jet engines because of the low thrust of these early power plants, de Havilland's DH-99 design, which was presented in June 1941, used a radical approach, featuring only one engine mounted in the middle of the fuselage and a twin boom tail. The aircraft was planned to use an all-metal construction and featured the air intakes for the engines at the wing roots. Though in the Ministry of Aircraft Production, the estimated performance figures were seen as somewhat optimistic, showing the new aircraft should be able to reach around 455 miles an hour speed with the use of a single jet engine producing around 2,700 pounds of thrust, but the project was still authorized to proceed just a month after the presentation of the plans. The development of the new aircraft started as an experimental design. Meanwhile, the planned engine was also in development under the guidance of Major Frank Harford, who was given access to Frank Whittle's design to try to build a more advanced and simplified model. The end result was the engine initially known as Halford H1 and later as the de Havilland Goblin. This design in the following years powered several fighter planes. But let's not get ahead of ourselves and go back to 1941. When during the development of the new fighter, the ministry suggested to de Havilland to modify the design and utilize their expertise in the use of plywood construction, which they perfected on the Mosquito type. The design, now using wooden construction in the front, but all metal wings and tail, was renamed to DH-100 in late 1941. A new specification, E641, was introduced for the project, and in the next April, the ministry authorized the building of two prototypes. Initially, the work on the new fighter was fairly slow, as the Mosquito production forced it into the background. But during this year, the Goblin engines were refined, several test runs were conducted on the testbed, and later 2 of the engines were installed in a Gloucester Meteor as well for flight testing. Though during 1942, the so-called Spider Crab design, which was the early codename for the new fighter, went through the mock-up phase and wind tunnel testing, and the engine was also finalized, its maiden flight had to be delayed, as the only available engine was sent to the US to be used on the Lockheed XP-80 fighter, after the first jet engine supplied to Lockheed was destroyed because of a design fault on the aircraft. The work on the de Havilland prototype progressed well, and after the next Halford engine became available, the maiden flight finally happened in September 1943, and the aircraft managed to reach a speed of 400 miles an hour during the 30-minute flight. Apart from noticing some instability, the test flight went smoothly. The second and third prototypes were built with modified tail surfaces to fix this instability. From these, the third one flew first in January 1944, while the second model took to the skies in March. This variant was modified to be tested as a carrier-based fighter, becoming the prototype for the later Sea Vampire models. The Royal Navy conducted interesting experiments on the usage of jet fighters on carriers, including landings on rubber decks with the wheels up. The overall impression of the type was very positive, but the pilots felt it was underpowered with the first iteration of the Goblin engine, which provided only 2,500 pounds of thrust. As a result, the Vampire needed longer takeoff runs than the piston-engined fighters, and similarly to other early jets, it didn't have very good acceleration or rate of climb. A few months after the test flights, in May 1944, a production order was issued for 120 units of the type, which was increased to 300 units a year later. The de Havilland facilities at the time were working already at almost full capacity, producing existing types like the Mosquito, so majority of the new fighters' production was undertaken by English Electric. Setting up the production lines, however, took time, so only a few of these fighters were finished before the end of World War II. The first production Vampire F-1 made its maiden flight in April 1945, and the first 16 aircraft were used to refine the design of the plane and the power plants. The type entered service on summer of 1946 and was used for a long time, receiving many different upgrades and going through numerous variations. So let's take a look at those now. The F-1 was the original design of the type. 3 prototypes and 228 production units were built. The first 40 units featured the original Goblin 1 engine, while the following planes were built with the more powerful Goblin 2 variants, producing 3,100 pounds of thrust, and allowing the fighter to reach 528 miles an hour top speed. From the 51st aircraft, the pressurized cockpit was introduced on the type. And from the 87th unit, a new type of sliding canopy appeared, allowing better visibility for the pilots. The next F2 variants used the more powerful Rolls-Royce Nene engines, producing 4,450 pounds of thrust. 3 units were modified for these engines, and they are easily recognizable from the so-called elephant ears on the top of the aircraft to provide additional airflow to the engine. In the end, the RAF decided not to use this type, but later they were used by other countries, like Australia and France. The following F3 models used the new Goblin 2 engines providing 3,400 pounds of thrust, and were further developed to increase the range of the fighter, which originally was just around 700 miles. The introduction of additional fuel tanks in the wings and the ability to carry drop tanks increased the range to around 1,200 miles. But on the test flights, directional instability was experienced, leading to redesigned and larger tail surfaces and more rounded vertical stabilizers. The addition of hardpoints for drop tanks eventually led to the capability to carry other suspended ordnance on the aircraft as well, leading to the development of the FB-5 fighter bomber variants. These models featured stronger wings, which, given the type was intended for low-level attack missions, were also shorter with square wingtips. A total of 1,123 units were built from this variant. The upgraded FB-6 variants were similar to the FB-5, but featured the newer Goblin 3 engines. The F-8 variant was an experimental version to increase the performance of the Vampire, featuring entirely new wings and a new Ghost engine, now producing 4,850 pounds of thrust. The improvements were successful, but given the excessive modifications, this variant entered production under a different name, as the de Havilland Venom. Finally, the last production variant was the FB-9, which was a tropicalized version of the fighter bomber models, featuring cockpit cooling and engine modifications to counter the performance drop at hot climates. A night fighter variant of the type under the designation NF-10 was developed, and 81 units were built for the RAF. Later export variants of the model, sold to other countries, were designated NF-54. Several trainer variants were also used, which were designated from T-10 to T-55. Upon the development of the longer-range FB-5 variants, the possibility to deploy the type as a carrier-based fighter was also explored. The Admiralty ordered 18 aircraft for testing, and the first F-20C Vampire flew in October 1948. And this type became the first jet aircraft to land and operate from carriers. Though they entered service with the Royal Navy, only a small number of these models were built, as they were viewed as a temporary type because of their short range and relatively weak engines. several export variants of the Vampire also existed, like the F-30, 31 and 32 for the Australian Air Force, the FB-50 known as G-28B for the Swedish, the FB-51 exported to France, the FB-52A variant used by the Italians, and many more. An experimental version named DH-108 was also built, featuring swept wings and a tailless design. This variant was developed to a 1945 requirement, and 3 units were built to test the wing handling at high subsonic speeds. Powered by the Goblin 4 engine producing 3,800 pounds of thrust, the plane reached more than 600 miles an hour speeds even at the early test flights. The unexplored region of breaking the sound barrier resulted in many accidents with the type, but the WW120 model, built with a more pointed nose and a different canopy, became the first British aircraft to exceed the speed of sound in September 1948. The Vampire was 30 feet 9 inches long, with a wingspan of 38 feet. It had an empty weight of 7,283 pounds, and a maximum takeoff weight of 12,390 pounds. The fighter was powered by a single de Havilland Goblin 3 jet engine, which allowed it to reach a top speed of 548 miles an hour. The plane had a range of 1,220 miles, and a service ceiling of 42,800 feet. Its main armament consisted of 4 20mm Hispano cannons mounted in the nose, and it could carry either 8 rockets or 2 500-pound bombs under its wings. The first production models of the Vampire entered service with the RAF in 1946, and the type slowly replaced many of the World War II piston engine fighters still in service. The Vampire set many records after its introduction, being the first jet aircraft to land on an aircraft carrier, setting an altitude record of 59,400 feet in 1948, and in the same year it was the first jet-powered aircraft type to complete a transatlantic flight. They flew their first combat missions during the Malayan emergency in the late 1940s, where the FB-5 fighter bomber variant saw the most action. They were also deployed to the Middle East during the Suez Crisis in 1956 by the RAF. The experience after operating the type in hot climates led to the development of the tropicalized FB-9 version, which entered service in 1952. After the mid-1950s, the Vampire started to show its age, and was gradually replaced by the newer Venom type, but the 2-seat trainer variants stayed in service with the RAF for another decade, and they were all retired in 1967. The type was also a great export success, with many countries ordering Vampires into service. Just to name the most prominent users of the type: Australia initially ordered 50 units in 1946, then further 80 units were built by de Havilland Australia, all of them the Rolls-Royce lean engine powered variants. The Royal Canadian Air Force operated 86 Vampires, mainly F-3 variants, until 1956. Egypt originally ordered 66 FB-52 export variants, from which they received 50 units, before further deliveries were cancelled over political problems. France also ordered from the Vampire FB-5 models, and later manufactured the lean-powered FB-53 model under license, building around 250 units, which entered service with the French Air Force under the Mistral name. India also used the type from 1948, and they participated in several combat missions during the Indo-Pakistani War in 1965. Italy was also interested in the type, and in late 1949 purchased the rights to manufacture the Vampire under license. A total of 220 units were built from different variants. Norway purchased 59 Vampires and kept them in service until 1957. Sweden initially purchased 70 Vampires in 1946, and after the type proved itself to be a very good aircraft, further 310 units were ordered. These served in the Swedish Air Force under the designations J-28A and J-28B, alongside with 57 J-28C trainer variants. Switzerland also purchased the Vampire and eventually manufactured the FB6 model under license, and they kept them in service until the late 1960s, but some were even used up to the 1990s for training purposes. The Havilland Vampire, though it started its life as a radical new design, turned out to be a great success amongst the early jet fighters, set several records during its lifetime, and served in more than 30 countries, and its production reached around 5,000 units in total during its lifetime. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please leave a like, subscribe to my channel, and in the comments let me know if there's any interesting events or vehicles you'd like to see.